In this video, I'm going to give an overview of this original DIY queen-size storage bed that I've designed and built to store all of this. I was somewhat hesitant to release a video with the bed appearing as it is in such an unfinished state, but at the same time, when I look around online, I don't see much information out there about do-it-yourself versions of these lift beds. This surprises me since I think these beds are pretty amazing in terms of the total storage volume combined with their ease of access. Also, I think it would be pretty easy for someone with the right skills to make this bed look pretty normal. The only reason I can think of that these beds aren't more commonplace is that people are somewhat intimidated by working with the lift mechanism. At least I was at first. When I started this project, I had a basic idea of what I was doing, but I had to improvise along the way, and I went through several iterations to end up here with what you see now. I think this current version is fairly simple, and I hope people seeing this design successfully implemented despite the poor workmanship would help inspire others to experiment with their own version. Couple of disclaimers before we get into the build. Number one, it's been a few years since the last time I've assembled this thing, and I'm making this video pretty much off of memory, and I'm most certainly leaving out some of the lower level details. Number two, I took some liberties to simplify a few things when I modeled this up. Like I mentioned earlier, I was somewhat improvising and I was reusing some lumber during my actual build, which caused me to end up with some oddball sizing. Number three, your mattress may have a completely different size or weight, which means that you may need to select a different assist mechanism with a different load rating. Here's a list of basic tools that I used during this build. I really don't have any fancy tools or a shop, and I was able to build this entire thing in my one-bedroom apartment. Here's a list of the lumber that I used in the model, and again, this slightly deviates from the build itself, and I changed a couple things around to simplify the build. The reason I didn't have a saw listed in the tools is because I actually didn't use one. I had this wood cut to length for me at Home Depot when I purchased it. Here's a list of the hardware that I used in my build. The only thing I want to point out is the fender washers. So I selected these fender washers such that the head of the screw does not pass through the opening, but the main body of the screw can. Let's not forget the most important part, which is the gas spring assist mechanism. And the unit I selected is the 48-inch length Selby brand 210-pound capacity lift. I purchased mine about 5 years ago through this company called woodcraft.com. However, I did a quick search and it appears that the same unit may also be available through different vendors online such as Amazon and Home Depot's website. I took each of the 75 and 3/4 inch length 2x12s and drilled these holes on them. The 9/16 hole will be used to bolt the legs on the head side, and the 5/16 hole will be used to locate the lift mechanism. On the 23-inch length 4x4, I drilled a 9/16 hole 8 1/4 inch from the top. The first assembly step I did was to assemble the 2x12 framing. I used elbow brackets and wood screws to join these pieces together. After framing up the 2x12s, I attached the legs with the 23-inch legs on the headboard side and the 19.5-inch legs on the footboard side. And notice that the 19.5-inch legs were inset on the inside, and this was to provide some structural stability since the platform actually rests on the top of the 19.5-inch legs. At this point, I threw on a level to make sure everything was level within reason before proceeding. Next, I installed the mechanisms onto the frame using the pre-drilled 5/16 holes and a 1/4-20 bolt on each side. The mechanisms are mounted through the hole which is closest to the headboard side, and to support the rest of the mechanism in place, I used these wood screws with fender washers to temporarily hold it while I made sure that everything was lined up correctly. Next, I assembled the 2x4 platform, and I joined the center 2x4 by using a 2x4 joist hanger. The width of the 2x4 frame is undersized by about a 1/4 inch compared to the inside width of the 2x12 frame, while the length of the 2x4 platform subassembly is undersized by several inches to permit for enough clearance when opening the bed. At this point, I attached the 2x4 platform to the mechanism with the wood screws and fender washers, and I tried out the action of the assembly by opening and closing it to make sure that nothing was binding and that the mechanism was able to move freely and that the rotation was roughly around the same center of axis for both sides. After I got everything dialed in, I went ahead and drilled out the second hole on each mechanism and attached a 1/4-20 bolt to give a little bit more structural stability. Next, I installed the 4x4 beam under the center of the 2x4s for structural support. I had to use these scrap pieces to give enough clearance on the head side because the 2x4 platform actually sweeps under the surface. Next, I installed the gas springs, and at this point there was enough leverage on the 2x4 platform assembly to push down, and I got it to a point where it was fully seated, and I drilled a couple of screws just to temporarily hold it in place while I was able to attach the plywood. After I had the plywood attached, I crawled under the bed and removed these temporary screws, and the build was complete. I've moved twice now with this bed, and each time I move I've had to fully disassemble it and reassemble it at the new apartment. And it is a little bit of a pain to reassemble this thing each time. So something that I think I would experiment with on the next iteration is to play around with these threaded inserts to make the assembly process go a lot quicker. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that this has sparked some ideas of your own.